up, bring it to the front. So this isn't perhaps just a normal lecture as part of a lecture series, but Antonino Saggio has been through the treadmill for 2 days as part of the DRL final juries, end of the program. Really appreciate all his insightful comments over 2 long, grueling days, and we're now asking you to lecture. Antonino is an author, a critic, writer, architect, and he's editor-in-chief of a very important seminal series of small pocket books called The IT Revolution in Architecture, which has some 30 titles by now. And it's been really seminal in defining what digital culture is over the last decade or so, and instrumental in disseminating those moments. Antonino is also chair of the Architectural Design and Information Technology Department at La Sapienza in Rome, and has taught at Carnegie Mellon and other schools in America and Europe. Tonight, Antonino will talk about time as digital time, which in the blurb that I sort of grabbed from as part of the introduction. Curiously, Antonino talks about digital time as being highly discontinuous, as full of mixities and incongruencies and complexities, rather than what I think over the last decade and a half has been understood very much as a kind of smooth space. And tonight he'll document in his lecture why he believes that digital time is actually not smooth, but rather the exact opposite. Join me please in welcoming Antonino Saggio.
Thank you, Tom, for this very nice introduction. Few instructions before starting that are very instrumental. First of all, it's my habit to have everything in the web already. So the material that I'm going to show you in some way can be used by you just after this, actually right now if you want. And because there are several types of materials, there are images, there are links, there are animations and things like that, and some of you wants to go on. So it's absolutely instrumental, the fact that it's in the web. So how you go there? You just Google my name, and then basically if you spell it right, okay, you arrive there, then from here you arrive there. Then it's completely unelegant to publish something before giving, so there is an hidden link. You have to understand that where the hidden link is. Now the hidden link, to go to this, it is here. This is the last book series. There are these 2 little things. Just this one is where is our talk of tonight, all right? Just very little things for some of you that really loves real-time information. Well, here is a YouTube movie about the jury that just took place. Okay, so YouTube. And he's an Italian looking at it, so I'm fascinated by London, by the place, etc. But since we have followers in all over the world, they really love these things. So, and all the presentations are there, because I took some of them out of the catalog. So everybody is there, okay? Now, just for the sake of this presentation, I will do it locally, okay? But everything that we're going to see is on the web, okay? So locally, I'll go here. I hope it works. All right, here we are. Now, the change in notion of time in contemporary cities, crisis, modernity, and information technology. Oh my God, what a topic. So I think we have to understand a series of things. First of all, I was really, really upset when I was preparing this talk. There were only 2 complete days of work in order just to prepare this talk, although I work, you know, for a kind of self-already cooking stuff. But there were 2 days very difficult, particularly the first one, because I didn't have a metaphor to bring to you such an issue and such a complex issues. There are basically 10 chapters in order to understand what we are talking about. And in order to understand these 10 chapters, I really said, I will make a disaster there, or I will die everybody. So, but one day in the morning, I have the good idea. And I said, all right, now imagine that this is an intellectual ride, okay? That we are doing an intellectual ride, okay? Like in a bicycle, everybody knows that. Or a spinning lessons if you are in London, all right? And what do you do in a ride or in a spinning lessons? You go at a different speed, okay? You go on plane, you go uphill, you go downhill. So understand that these 10 different chapters, some are plane, something are a little bit uphill. And once I found this idea, I was very excited. I said, all right, I probably can have you with me for kind of 1 hour and 15 minutes, more or less, to kind of following ideas. Because what I'm really dealing with in my life are mainly ideas. And in some way I was really delightful during the jury because of many aspects. But in certain particular moment, Ross said, you are wearing my glasses. I think that was wonderful. I cannot say you are wearing my glasses because I don't design glasses, but I deal with ideas. And I'm really sure that I can say, you read one of the book of the series, you read one of the book, you read one of the book. So in some way, my ideas or all the others' idea in some way are with you already, okay? So anyway, this is the book series. This is the last book that is down in the triangle book. This is a very interesting one. There are other 30. So you are familiar with that. So I can skip about this. So what are, and then I want to make kind of a real thank to Tom and to Cass together, because we met all together in Delft, right? And it's important, this liaison, I think. We were there, we were dealing with issues, we are here back again, and then it's the way that the net of ideas and person relate to each other. So I really want to thank you for this invitation. Okay, now, this is called a scratching part of the spinning lesson, all right? You know that you don't start right away to write, you do a scratching before, okay? So this is just kind of an introduction. Now we go in the first aspect. We have 10 different issues to talk about in order to understand what this title means, okay? The changing notion of time in contemporary city crisis, modernity, and information technology. There are 10 chapters. Basically, actually, there are 9 chapters and a relaxing final session. I will call it a scratching part again, that we relax after the effort, okay? So let's start with one thing that is pretty important. Industrial cities versus information city, what are the key differences? Are something that are pretty much known and something that is interesting to think about. Now look at this very well-known paintings by Mondrian. It is clearly a symbol and a program and a diagram, if we want to use a modern term, of what the idea of the industrial city is. It works as a series of interconnected linearly processes. It's kind of a chain. The idea of that kind of industrial idea of thinking is related linearly, that is a kind of the paradigm that is behind the whole industrial idea and the industrial architecture that we used to call modern architecture. And even the idea of the city is so much related to that. Because the key idea, of course, is zoning. You cannot understand what is the idea of the industrial city without the idea of zoning. In different parts of the city, you do different things, and they are connected linearly. In certain hours of the city, you do certain things, and then you change and you switch. Then I needed to find another image to tell you about the complexity of our time, and particularly try to understand that these pictures refers very much to European cities in a way, because European cities have to deal at the same time with the past, the history, and the challenge of our time, and this notion, different notion of time. And I think this is a very interesting picture for me to show exactly that change of idea. Here what you see an image that is, by the way, of course, it's a Rauschenberg painting of '62. You clearly see an image there, And you may imagine that is the image so present in, many European cities of, whatever cultural and historical value is there. But then you see there that there are layers of meaning and layers of forms that are different, and those contribute to create a kind of contemporary idea. Basically coming from a place where history is so important, like Rome and basically all Italy, that is very instrumental idea for us. How you can work to a new image that keeps some presence of the past, but at the same time use that kind of layer technique to create a new image. And it is clearly that this is not a collage. The collage is the old modernistic idea to put one piece conflicting with the other. Here is a completely different story, it's a completely different diagram, it's a completely different project. Let's talk other issues about contemporary city. It is absolutely an abstract, syntactic way. The industrial world and the industrial city was a machine, actually, wanted to be a machine. And instead, today, image, communication, and I put just for the first time the word information that will become more and more important as we go on, he plays a role. It definitely plays a role again in our understanding of the city. So I picked this Giacomo Costa work because I think it's pretty interesting in pinpoint that presence of image and communication in the new idea of the cities. And in a way, it is something that also explains why so expressive forms you are working with. Let's see another idea. Again, is the idea of, in some way, the old idea of the city was in some way really strongly related with the productive paradigm of the industrial time. And that paradigm basically is the cause-effect relationship, linear relationship, and the symbol of that is the assembly line. The assembly line as a way to put in order processes, to put it in a rational way, with a cause-effect series of relationship. We know, and there is another aspect related to that, that basically the whole idea of the industrial city in some way, not only from a figurative point of view, but from an organizational point of view and from a productive point of view, was really based on that. There were workers, how you call blue collars, the cities were done by a large percentage of blue collars. That things has changed completely. We are in a situation where the metaphor is not that one of the assembly line anymore, is the idea clearly that the information is the driven force behind a structure of a city. Not only information plays more and more than one role, and it is clearly the productive force. We know that after already there are more than 25 years that Alvin Toffler wrote The Third Wave that really shows very clearly how information is a new era in humanity. And the new era is because is in any single product, even in a product that you buy at the supermarket, the large majority of the thing that is embedded into it is information. Even if you buy an apple, the larger part of its value is information, from every aspect that is related to that. And even from the fact that you buy it with a credit card related to the card of the supermarket, there is a flow of information that goes continuously. So even in the traditional good, information becomes the key. Imagine when we deal with electronic. Imagine when we deal with software, it's the percentage. So the old cities of today are done like that. And the key word is not more assembly line, becomes evidently the net as a metaphor, as a changing system of relationship, as a way to transport whatever kind of goods, in different ways. And in the way to continuously reassemble situation in an anti-hierarchical way, in a kind of net, much more horizontal way of thinking. That's why also some of the implication of this project brings ideas in that direction that are real social, technological, humanistic problems. They are not only formal generation problems. Also, there are substances in this approach. Other techniques, we are always in the first chapter, industrial cities versus information city. It's very simple chapter. Okay, and then, of course, design technique. The whole idea related to the industrial paradigm was that it was a pure machine object, to be put it on an abstract plane. There are variations of that, but that is the basic idea. The architecture was good if in some way was able to have some aspect of machine itself and be completely independent from what is there as an outside. What was outside was an hygiene resource as a functional point of view, was not something to engage from a design point of view, because the philosophy behind that was exactly against that. And of course today we are in a complete different attitude. We work within existing structure, we work within existing cities in many cases, and we often use techniques of hybridization between nature, or what we used to call nature, and the building. And today we have other notions like landscape, is just to mention one of the most important ones. We often work not in front, but in between, etc. One of the key aspects of this changing notion between industrial and information city is really the changing idea of the relationship with the nature. This is absolutely a crucial element, because basically the whole industrial paradigm needs to conquer the world, needs to colonize the world, needs to build new things in a continuous expansion of it to the outside, to that kind of vacuum, uncivilized world in a way. And today, and that's why nature was just something different from architecture. I mean, this Hilbersheimer shows more than everything else this idea of a continuous expanding machine at the conquer of what was the outside, the kind of the Far West attitude, I call it. And instead, one of the key things of what is happening today in the changing of paradigm is exactly that reconsideration of the presence of the nature within the existing cities. This is something that has so many implications. Of course, there are some formal implications. Of course, there are ways that we are kind of thinking of architecture in some way of generative aspects similar to architecture. It's been already pretty much settled down, the idea that how you deal with architecture and landscape as a unified figure is already a conquer of the 90s, basically the beginning of the 90s. But this idea that you can conquer, you can have a relationship with nature that is historically profoundly different from the past, really comes because there is an opportunity there. And the opportunity is very simple, and then is a process that has been going on in the last 25 years, that industrial sites, either they shrink and shrink and shrink because of the technology, or they're moving somewhere else in the world because communication is very easy today, both from a physical point of view or from, let's say, an informational point of view. So this process of shrinking and relocating, creating in all cities in the world large areas in which can be renegotiating, using a word that is very familiar here, renegotiating the relationship between architecture and nature. And that is something of incredible importance historically. I'm showing you something. I mean, I've been discussing about this issue always. And when I was in Seoul just probably 1 or 2 months ago, I discovered the most beautiful example of that. What these guys have done, it is pretty amazing. Basically, they had something like that, bordering the downtown. So they have a highway, and that was bordering the skyscraper's city center. What they did is pretty simple. They took it away. So that was the place of the highway. They took it away, and they created this new piece of landscape and leisure and place to be inside the city. Now, this is not 100 meters. This is 3 kilometers long. So it's a kind of a perfect example to understand how these new things are happening in the city, and then we'll give new directions about what we are doing. Okay. Well. This is a REM Colas building. And I need to show this. Anyway, okay. Because it's a very interesting building. Wait, don't worry. Is it all right? Okay. Now, I'm using this a little bit for relaxing before next section, but at the same time, because this is very interesting building to understand. Because what happens is that really communication and information becomes really a key factor in today's architecture. It's not only because the building has a pretty amazing form and shape, which is already something, you know, it just speaks by itself, but also because technology and information technology is built within that project. What we are looking here, for example, are those things along the street. You see, those are speakers. Those are interactive speakers. When you arrive, the speakers say, hello, Antonino. And when you leave, say, bye-bye, Antonino. It doesn't really say Antonino for the simple reason that I don't have a card that is interacting with him. But if I have a card, of course, they will say, hello, Antonino, right? Or show me my friends in other parts of the world. Now, what is interesting here, the inside, the lobby, is not a traditional lobby anymore. It's a place in which information is depicted in a very interesting way. It's a place for art that is done contextually. Video contextually are done there periodically. Now, let's see other things. I hope it goes up. Now, the building has this pretty interesting shape that these panels are kind of moving one to the other. Easy one say, all right, that's pretty good, that's pretty smart. But when you look at the night, it comes something very interesting. Those switching of the panel are not done only for purely formalistic reason, are the container of changeable information. And the changeable information, in this case lighting, can be interactive related to whatever we are. Okay? So this is a real thing. We are not dreaming of it. Okay? Why we were writing these things 10 years ago, and basically one of the aspects of the book series, it was really understanding how interactivity, for example, was a key issue. Here now we have things, and we don't have small pavilions anymore. We have actual skyscrapers. And so this is pretty impressive. And the fact that it is on the east, I think it is interesting also. Now, another little bit of relax. So information is crucial here. And I hope it works. Does it work? No, it goes on site. Why it goes on site? It should go faster. Okay, well, probably we'll skip that then. Where I was locally before. Sorry, I wanted to show these things locally, if it is possible. All right. This is on the web, but anyway, this is what this guy is doing. It is interesting. This is a little hint. we work on a course that is a combination of information technology and issues related to the actual design. They are not really actual design, but we have to show a series of ideas. This is a gasometer that was existing in Rome, and this was one of the work of a group of students, shows really what is possible, how an existing structure can be changed in our time in order to deal with information, and how that thing can be of some aesthetic interest. I'll just show you one thing here. So all these are different type of manipulation of light, interactivity, and other effects in order to understand how to do these things. So we are really in a different world, okay? And I think really the information is the key, and then we are living in a different city. All right, just one little thing. I wanted just for the sake of the student to understand, I think it's here, that this is a real project on a way. Where it is? Aspetta intro. I don't want the intro. Okay, where I am. Just a second. Of course, the students know much better their work than the instructors. Anyway, what I wanted to show you is that basically here there is a lot of research going on in how you make these things, and particularly, probably it's here. Okay, basically here there is explained very much well how the whole system works, in terms of the light, in terms of the sounds, etc. And each of these, basically, it is explained pretty well. For example, how you can do projection, such a big thing, you know, in terms of costs and technology and stuff like that. And and the other aspects are depicted very well. So I'm doing this and remind you that these things are on the web. So that's why it's crucial. Probably one of you is interested to look at these things more. Okay, so as far as you understand the path, you are fine. Okay, let's see. I hope we can find our way back. All right. So we finished the first cycle. Now we go a little more uphill. Okay, just a little more. I tend to assume that everything that I said was completely fine, and everybody knew all these things. It's just, you know, getting into it. Now we move a little bit, and we focus not on these issues that we discussed so far, but exactly on the idea of the time that, on a certain extent, is our topic of today. Now, the whole idea of the industrial time was that, of course, was circular. In a certain moment, you do certain activities. It was like a watch, right? The idea of the time was similar of a watch, exactly. It rotates. Actually, the idea of rotation is such important paradigm to understand Bauhaus building. So it rotates, right? And then in certain hours, you do certain things. In other hours, you do other things. So from 8 to 5, you work. From 5 to 7, well, in England, probably you go to pub, then you go to sleep or whatever, okay? And that is kind of a cycle. And that cycle not only organized time, also organized physically the city. That is something important to understand. So the two things are combined. But in the terms, and another interesting thing, let's make a very, very stupid question. And we can ask ourselves, where is the watch? Where was the watch? The watch, right? This is the watch, or Alan, watch? This is, what do you, the clock, okay. The clock or the watch, where it is? It is clearly, in some way, defined in places, like in this case, in a school, we have very strong that image, you know, that the clock were in the tower bell, that the clock was in our whist, or the clock was in the post office, whatever. So it was localized, even the clock. And today, if you think, where is the clock or where is the watch? Well, 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 it's everywhere. It is in our computer, it is in our digital phone, it is in our environment, whatever, from whatever system as its clock or its watch being in. So there is a kind of digitalization of the time that is not only physical, which is pretty obvious. I don't know if I was well enough to describe it in English. In Italian, I'm very articulated on this point. In English, I'm sorry, I'm kind of flat. But anyway, so that idea of the digitalization of time, it is very, very interesting. I think many of you know Mark Goldrup, symbol of that. Anyway, I read it like that. That becomes really a kind of digital idea. And the digital idea of time is an extremely important one to understand because changes really, literally everything. If time is not localized anymore in pieces of cities or in our words or in our building, if time is everywhere because of the technology, because of the information technology, because of the electronic, that means a series of things that we all experience. There are no more difference between leisure time and working time. And I know that the students of AA knows that very, very well. And then there are no more real difference between creative work and actual work. And there is no... And particularly, the city and the places work in a completely different fashion. They work in a mixed system in 24-hour cycle, which is completely different idea from the previous one. So we are just tackling the problem of time from this very superficial level, but although it's very true, everybody has experienced that and knows that our notion of time is completely different because of the impact of information technology. So these two images are pretty interesting on that point of view. This is, you know, the localized idea of time, and this is kind of this digitalization of time that we, all of us, experience. But believe me, this is at the beginning of the story, just the beginning. We are just scratching and we are still pretty much playing. Now, let's tackle another issue and let's start another chapter. This is the notion of space. It's something quite interesting for an architect to understand. Okay, let's put it like that. We discussed a lot during these 2 days, not a lot, we touched several times the concept of tool. Why tool is so important. It's so important for every possible activities, but particularly for thinkers, particularly for painters, and evidently for designers. Why? Because our notion, our understanding of space and our understanding of possible manipulation of space are really strictly related with a tool. And by the word tool, I mean a broad series of elements that comes from the physical tool to the scientific tool. So there are, I put it together in this word, okay? Now let's imagine, to make an example, the pyramids, okay? How can you build a pyramid if you don't have the idea of a triangle? And particularly, how you can triangulate things. I mean, it is clearly that the Egyptian had an idea of what a triangle is, and probably very good notion of trigonometry. So in that architecture is embedded in a way a kind of a idea of the tool that we can assume is basic trigonometry. Now, this simple idea changes our way of looking at things. It doesn't exist, this will be a very important point that we will develop more and more and more. It doesn't exist something like an absolute idea of space. Particularly for architecture, designers, and painters, but even for normal person to a certain extent, that idea of space is changing over time. And what is more interesting, as Kuhn expressed more than once, sometime that notion has to jump from an old one to a new one. That is the moment of a revolution. And there have been many revolutions, but I just mentioned for the sake of time, and we are at chapter number 3, we have 10. So, that one of the key moments is the moment of perspective, the invention of perspective. Because what perspective is of course, is a tool that is also a mental way to understanding space, to project space, to relationship between what is outside and what it is in some way represented. And that was the first time that came again, probably again, I don't discuss about that point, but anyway, came that notion. And that notion, that tool, that mental tool, was so completely opposite of the Gothic idea that, unfortunately, I'm sorry, the Gothic architecture must have been destroyed, completely destroyed by the new paradigm. Actually, that happened in Florence at the beginning of the 15th century. You know, the Gothic architecture went on and on, of course, but that new paradigm of perspective push it, the emergence of a completely new way of imagining representation in painting, in sculpture, and above all, in architecture. Because the burn of rational humanistic architecture cannot be understood if you don't understand that there is a tremendous effort to understand how we can prospectivize the world. So the architecture has to change completely in order to fulfill those new vision of the world. So we come with, a modular architecture, with something that is recognizable, something that can have proportion and modularity and all that. So a complete different system of architecture was to be invented in order to fulfill that idea of space. That doesn't happen only there. We can go on and on. I mean, all the the moment of born of the new architecture of the 20s is again a complete revolution from that to another one, because another jump was needed. The abstract, analytical, mechanical, cause-effect approach, the anti-contextual approach of modernity needed to destroy completely this paradigm, and that was destroyed. And of course, when we deal with information technology, I am kind of putting a little bit in your mind the idea that we are in another phase of complete revolution. And that's why the book series is called like that. Now another issue, number 4, that is easy. So the uphill, the little uphill, it's over. This is very simple to understand. How we do that, we as human beings, a very intelligent species, as far as we know, we can create processes. And the processes are something very important. The processes are intellectual and scientific way to understand the world that we just discussed about perspective, but they are also physical. I mean, this is an incredible process. Okay, the binoculars, right? The binoculars that Galileo made, it is an incredible process. For the first time, was possible to really calculate and see certain movement of the stars. For the first time can be proved something very important, that the Earth, unfortunately, is not at the center of the universe, and other things like that. But that idea, that processes, that idea of space, in some way related also to a new idea of architecture. Now, I will not put yourself in this Borromini syndrome that I mentioned during one jury that I had. That will be a completely different story, okay? But I had a very important Borromini syndrome, and this is one of the aspects, how the lens that Galileo invented in the same way, has a kind of relationship with that idea of space. That is another chapter. But just believe me, processes are very important. And of course, processes, oh my God, we are in 2007. We are full of incredible processes. First of all, we invented the thing that is the closest thing to God that human being has done. What is that? It's Google. Google is the closest thing to God that human being invented. Use Google as your, really ask things to Google. Ask always. And you have a really, really high chance to have an answer. Google is everywhere. Google is kind of real time, almost, and he knows stuff. He is incredible. It is an incredible process. We do completely different things today because there is Google. And then, just to mention one, and then we have, we just mentioned, we have, of course, cellular phone that changes all the way that we do everything, from mother to son relationship to peers relationship. And then we have, and then just if you go into technology, we are ready to do a jump that is incredible. With nanotechnologies, we are going to build something that is unbelievable, really unbelievable. Because we will be able to put in matter intelligence, in matter. And put intelligence in matter means that we can have a completely different idea of how to make architecture, how to make walls, how to make things, because there is intelligence built in matter. And, well, then I had the chance to go to a series of conferences where I was very excited to meet astronauts. Astronauts are great guys. And one of the aspects that they pointed out is working to an infra-free idea of architecture. What does it mean, an infra-free? Simple. We don't need any more kind of sewage, streets, and all that. We kind of working for a generation of architecture that is self-sufficient in a way. And we can do that in order to push the intelligence, the technology, and all that. So start to imagine what it is, an infra-free architecture. So we have processes. We have processes. Now, let's go to chapter number 5. Looking inside. This is a very important, it's simple to understand. There is a relationship between the tool and what we do and what we want to do. There is always a kind of continuous flow of ideas or discussion, imagination that goes in this relationship between the tool, the way that we shape the tool, and the type of architecture that we're going to do. Is a challenge, is a constant challenge. Now, this issue that seems so easy, so simple, and particularly discussing about this here, where everybody does that, was not clear at all. I think I have to mention one point here, and it's the difference of generation of architects from, let's say, the great masters of these late modernities. Za, of course, is one of them, in my opinion. Frank Gehry is another one, and Peter Eisman is another one, and Rem Koolhaas is another one. Let's keep Rem Koolhaas apart. What these guys are doing, basically, they are inventing a new idea of architecture that was coming from their culture that was visually, that was painting, that was historical. The whole idea of landscape, of the relationship between figure and ground, and how to shape a completely new idea of architecture, for example, that Za invented in the beginning of the 80s, was really directly related to Clay, the constructivists, and others, but basically Clay. So, she was looking inside what? She was looking inside an aspect of the modernity that was not really understood and was not really developed. The way that I'm dealing with Gary, by the way, I wrote a book on Gary, I wrote a book on Eisman. On Gary, basically there is an understanding of futuristic plasticity that was not developed in architecture, and in some way was able to do that. So again, something that was not developed, through his work was able to become an impressive architecture. And Eisman also. You know, I'm looking at him particularly, again, looking at certain variation and oscillation of forms, for example, of a painter like Balla, again, of the futurism. But anyway, let's focus on the point. They were looking as a kind of heritage or cultural presence, and they are transformed in a new vision of architecture, and then they use contemporary tool to build that. But your generation is a completely different one. It's a completely different one, because you are born with a computer. Your mental landscape is not clay. Your mental landscape is not Boccioni. Your mental landscape is not Balla. Your mental landscape is computers. And so it's important to understand that there is a profound shift in this generation that is, I mean, not in terms of age, but I consider myself in this generation. And there is a relationship with the tool that is an intellectual relationship. And this is one of the key images for me. I always use this. Why? Because this is Steve Jobs, one of my heroes. And this is Steve looking inside a chip in '76 in a computer fair of like 68 guys in California. Why I love that? Because he was looking inside the tool, was looking at the chip. And basically it's the same attitude that I think this generation must develop. Looking, experimenting, using, understanding the tool, not to understand how to build a Boccioni, that basically was the way that Gary is doing, or up to a certain phase, but as a way to really understanding the inner logic of it. So I know that I'm talking about things that are pretty obvious here, but never know. Now we really go uphill, okay? Now we have to go uphill. So basically we have very little pictures, only this one. And we have to understand a very important relationship, that is the relationship of time and space. Well, space, as we said before, is kind of a tricky thing because changes over time. Our notion of space is culturally changes dramatically, and the architecture must change sometimes must jump, really, literally jump, in order to fulfill another idea of space. But let's skip this thing and let's start to understand space. What it is space, how we can define space to a certain extent. Well, first of all, the physics, like Einstein said, space, what is that? There is no really interesting thing you can say about space if not related to time. Basically, that's it. There's nothing sensible and logical that you can say about space if it's not related to time. Okay. That is from a physical point of view. Now, I have no more than 7 or 8 minutes to show you a new way to look at this. And so I have to find a strategy that in some way is familiar to you. My point is the only way to understand space is through time. And there is no other real clue to understand space through time. And through the generation of space, exactly. So now everybody knows what is an extrusion process, because you are all familiar with computers. If we have a dot, we can extrude the dot, right? And we have a line. If we have a line, we can extrude the line, and we can have a plane, right? If we have a plane, we can extrude the plane and have a three-dimensional volume. If we extrude a three-dimensional volume, we have what we call, and the mathematician call, hypercube, but let's forget it. Now, let's go back in just one of these dimensions. And let's look, well, to just a plane situation, okay, like a leaf here. Is a word that is done only, the word exists only in two dimensions. Can you understand that? It does exist only in two dimensions. And you say, oh my God, how can you? Because you're looking everything from your perspective. You don't have to look at things from your perspective. You have to understand that there are different subsystems, different universe, how the physician call, that are coexisting. And to make an example to do that, you can imagine a caterpillar, right, or a worm. What does the worm does? Only knows, you know, two-dimensionality, basically because it's physically built in two dimensions. You can imagine that a microbe or even a worm doesn't have eye. So how it can experience that space, that universe that is bidimensional in which he lives? Very simple, with the idea of time. How much time goes from one place to other, okay? How much time it takes to go from one edge to the other edge. If he has no visual understanding, and it can always go like that, basically the only way to understand the space will be through an understanding of time. Imagine that you are blind, will be the same experience. So time is very strictly related to that idea of space, and actually is the better way to understand space, really, to understand space through time. Well, I kind of developed this idea for a while, was actually starting from the way to understand the creation of an artificial world in the computer, and then I understood the implication of this. And there are very interesting implications. So there is that kind of notion that there are different universes. Imagine a universe that is only linear, okay? Like there is only a line. Okay, everything is confined on a line. Again, how you can understand what that line is, except that going from one edge to the other. So through time again. And this is just two-dimensional. Now, we have to do an important step. And we have to do it an experiment. You can do it by yourself if you want, but it's very interesting. Take a piece of paper. And now this piece of paper, imagine that is our universe. And then you are a worm or a caterpillar that is confined only there, okay? What's going on here is that you go from point A to point B, and then you're understanding this situation because it takes a certain amount of time, right? Now, let's imagine that this space is starting to curving itself. Curving and curving and curving. You are only experiencing the two-dimensional dimensions of this, right? So what you do, you basically do this way, but this basically takes the same time. So to a certain extent, it's the same thing. But now, let's imagine for a second that you look at this universe from another point of view. And instead of being a worm, you are a three-dimensional being. And you look at this and, hey, you caterpillar, you are crazy. To go from point A to point B, you don't have to do that path. You just can jump. So what that jump attitude, it is a very interesting one, because shows you the possibility of another dimension. And for the caterpillar, that the other dimension basically doesn't exist. But from three-dimensional world, you can have, you know, completely different experience of these things. So from A to B is a completely different path. We know that. You know, we experience that every time. Computers experience that constantly. exactly this thing. You know why? Because information, to go from here to there, it may be that goes through Canada. It is faster. This is how net works. It's not necessarily said that to send the information to my friend Lucy, that I'm very glad you came, I need to do that. I can do, you know, a turn of the world and go in completely different directions. And this is exactly how net works. We do the same things in traffic jams, right? We know we are constantly able to put these two factors together, you know, that space and time doesn't necessarily match in the linear way that we think, because we do different things. So the jump is a crucial attitude. I am in putting this word that is very important for us. Why is very important? Because it relates to the processes. The processes are the way that we can start to experiment other dimensions. It doesn't exist a thing like a three-dimensional world that we believe is it. That thing just doesn't exist. There are many parallel universes living all together. The universe of a microbe, the universe of certain animal, and then I'm going to that, and the universe of the human beings are completely different ones. They touch to each other, but they are not the same, absolutely not the same. But we have something very important, that are the processes. And with the processes, we can, in some way, understanding other dimensions, not only going down, which is, you know, microscope and so on and so forth, but also, more interesting, going up in another dimension. We can play with the idea of simultaneity, for example, in a way that is completely unconceivable just 15 years ago. We kind of get used to it. But, okay, now we go a little more uphill. And let's try to understand what is space. We understand that it is related to time. We understand that it is spatially changeable and historically changeable. That notion is completely different. And we must have a definition. We must have really a tool. Okay, let's see this. Okay, this is Marcos Novak and an homage to the Greek community that I understand is very popular here. Well, anyway, why this is important? Because many reasons. I have to hook up my computer to the energy. Well, it will be a break. I'll show it to you again in the meantime. All right. So keep this in mind. What we see here, and what is the thesis that I'm going to develop in this final part, is that space, in reality, the best way to understand space is information. Really, that seems so stupid, but it's so profound and so important. And once you get it, you have a real tool. Now, why space is information? Well, let's try to understand, and in order to do that, we have to make kind of the tour, okay? And the tour starts from this question, apparently strange question. Does color really exist? Now, how we answer to this, the real answer is that color exists, it doesn't exist at the same time. Let's try to understand why. Let's tackle the problem of color that in some way will be the key for us to understand why space is information. So this is the detour. Please try to understand this. First of all, it's contextual. There are studies in psychology of perception that is something that already started in the 19th century, and then there have been implications with, you know, philosophy, arts, and etc. I don't even mention that. But anyway, there are technical and scientific studies in philosophy of perception that says something at the end, very simple. The perception of color is contextual. We understand color not in absolute terms, but because of its relationship with others. They do hundreds of books. And, you know, if you go into that specific thing, but at the end, one point that is important for us to understand is that you perceive color contextually, relating to certain situation. In some cases you see it, in some cases you just don't see it. It depends how it matches with other. Interesting, no? You see why all this has anything to do with architecture? It does, a lot. Now, look at this. It's the same thing, right? It's exactly the same thing. Just I took it apart. So it's not contextual anymore. So while you were reading this before, it clearly have an idea of transparencies. Here you'll read it clearly as a separation of different colors, correct? So this brings another sub-consequences that is absolutely crucial. That is the different role of transparencies from the time of Gropius to our time. We, as contemporary architects, we use also transparencies, of course, but we use in a completely different way. For Gropius was the revelation of the world, how it was objective, was the new Sagelkeit, and the transparency was the symbol of that. While for contemporary architects, it's just something to play with in many different ways concerning form-making, information, contextual, not contextual, etc. The symbol of that is the Cartier building by Jean Nouvel in Paris. And here it is just that. So there are consequences of what I'm saying in architecture, but we are sticked on the problem to understand why space is information. So anyway, we understood that it's contextual. Color is not absolute, it's contextual. Now let's go to a second point. It is absolutely physiological. What does it mean? That means that what exists are the electromagnetic radiation, boom, that hits object and bounce back, all right? Those are the electronic magnetic forces that creates what we call color. But the way that we look at that thing and that we call color is completely dependent physiologically. Birds have 4 cones. Cones are the way that you look at colors. Birds have an incredible amount of colors that they look at. Their information of the space is completely different from ours. Completely different. Because they have a range of electronic radiation that they can actually see that is absolutely no comparison with us. I found somewhere this picture. Well, this is something brought back in kind of gray, what they look at. But of course, they look colors that we cannot even depict. But just to tell you an idea how we see certain things, how they see other. Now, and why Many mammals just look in black and white. We know many animals, mammals, are looking black and white for the simple reasons that they are developed from a DNA of animals that were living in the dark. They were small animals originally in a very hostile world, and they were had to be in the dark. And in the dark, color is not important. Other aspects are important, you know, other way to look at it. So that's why mammals are, in the large majority, looking just in black and white. Men are a kind of different variation, because we developed a third cone. And that third cone allows us to see color, okay? To a certain extent, and only certain part. Now, the interesting thing it is, well, if the perception of color, it is contextual, as we have seen, and is physical also, it really, how can I say, we as species, we move arms to a certain extent in a similar way, right? Except the person in the circus that can do incredible things. But normally, we do it in a kind of similar way. So probably, to a larger extent, we see colors in a similar way, to a certain extent, in the same way that we move certain things in a similar way. Now let's come to the third level of the question again, is does color really exist? Don't forget the question. So contextual, physical, and cognitive. Well, this is I was thinking, I don't know very well British culture, but I know that basically you don't have, I mean, if I ask to a British person what color is the sky, he probably will answer, if it is fine, blue, right? Because historically, in this part of the world, you don't have many words to say blue, historically. You basically have one, because the sky, it is normally gray. When it's blue, it's blue. For us, in Naples, okay, we have probably 20 different ways to call blue. You know, we have azzurro, celeste, blue, Prussia, etc. So that means an interesting thing, that the notion of colors is also cognitive. To make that more clear, just imagine making this question, what color is the eyes? We can probably, you know, say white, right? If we go and we talk with Eskimos, I think we don't have many Eskimos in the students' body here, unfortunately. Okay, but they have many words to say what color eyes is. Why? Simple, because they need it. They need it for many reasons, okay, that all in one way or the other needed for their environment. So they need to know that that eyes is called white wall, and that other is called EDD. And that was absolutely important for many reasons. And for us, it's just white. So there are these three levels. They are combined together. The physical level, the cognitive level, and the contextual level. So at the end, let's go back to the question. Does color really exist? The answer is electronic radiation exists. Color is very strictly depending on these three factors. But if it is depending on these three factors, it is information. It is information. It is information in all these three cases. So it's a kind of the minimum one aspect of a bunch of information that arrive to us and is absolutely necessary for many reasons. Although we kind of forget that idea, we never really use that idea, and we are kind of not thinking about these issues, and we generally think, of course, color exists. Color doesn't exist. Color is information. And color is strictly related to these three things combined together, in which the physical aspect, so that the prosthesis, in a way, how we can change the physical limits, the cognitive aspect, and the contextual aspect are very much related to one to the other. So, Let's make another step. Naturally, this kind of thinking goes in many other things. Many other sensorial experiences are basically information. Sound is very much similar to that. It's exactly the same thing. Sonar wave exists. Sound is something that, again, is contextual, physical, and contextual, physical, well, anyway. And cognitive, right? And particularly is cognitive when we talk about language, that is the most developed way of sound, right? The same thing applies to other things. So this changed very much, I think, the way that we look at these things. Now, this is Santa Sofia. And I was very much in interest with this astronauts word at the same time, because astronauts are a very good example of people that experience space completely different way that we experience. What they call is microgravity. What is microgravity? Well, everybody knows. Of course, this space is not how we are experienced, but for them, a particular niche is over there is important, and a particular niche behind that, because they flow in the space. So the space is as a container of information is something completely different from what we experience normally. So that is a case of human beings that experience space completely different ways. They float, and then they look, and they in some way design, and then use, and they imagine whatever space completely differently, because change one of those parameters. So when I was there, I was going in Santa Sofia, and I had this interesting thing. By the way, Santa Sofia is one of the most incredible Roman architecture ever built, because it's done in that attitude. Anyway, but let's forget. Now, what is really great when I was there is that this incredible dome was exactly divided in two. One part was, let's say, the so-called normal Santa Sofia, and the other one was a digitized, physically digitized space. Space full potentially of information. So, I guess that you understood what's going on here, right? The question here is, does space really exist or doesn't exist? That is the question that Marcos was making to himself, making this installation. And of course, you don't see it, but space as information, it exists. It can be manipulated, it can be activated, it can be designed. What's going on here is pretty simple. One portion of the space is activated with sensors. That space visually doesn't exist, but from an informational point of view, oh my God, it exists. You can penetrate that space. And of course, in the moment that you penetrate that space, action can start to happen. What you see here, it is clearly that there are a series of effects that are related to that. That is one, it is that clearly the sensors are activating algorithms that produce music. At the same time, that production of the algorithm of the music at the same time can produce 3D manipulation of space that you see projected there. And at the same time, if I have an almost real-time modeling machine, I can create one of those pieces there that are hanging there that are only the manipulation of that specific space in that specific moment, all right? So I think this is a very clear example of what space as information can be. And we, as a designer, if we start to look at things like that, we can start to rethink several issues concerning, our design, our possibilities, and the way that we deal with these things. Well, this image is very much known by many of you, right? This is Tom Cruise in Minority Report, famous scene, what is actually doing in that scene, I'm just telling for the person that are not aware of this particular movie, is basically taking, like, you know, he's not an astronaut, he's not floating, but anyway, he's taking piece of information there and assembling there, putting there, and then doing everything in space, in space. So in space, the pieces of information are put it and recollected and recreating, etc. This is a technology that we can do it. No, there is basically almost no problem in order to do that, but gives a very clear perception of the idea that what is that vacuum that we think was a vacuum is not a vacuum at all. So going back to Copernicus, you know, basically we've been educated, I don't know about England, but I think it will be more or much the same. At a certain age of our life, our teacher explained to us this shocking thing, that the Earth is not at the center of the universe. So in some way we had that imprinting. After we understood that Father Christmas doesn't exist anymore, that was the first major shock, we had this second one, you know, that the Earth is not at the center of the universe. Nobody really, as far as I don't know about England, explained to us that such a thing as space exists. We tend to believe the fact we are still centered not as a Earth, but as a human being. We think that our three-dimensional world is the world, which is not. We are one universe, one subsystem that coexists with many other subsystems. And we can jump in different directions, going backward and going farther away. And the processes are the key to do that. And one of the many jobs of your generation and our generation is how to understand that, and more particularly understanding the most difficult job, that is what kind of new aesthetic is related to that. That is the most difficult word. Because for the modern movement, or for the industrial movement, in order to understand how to create a new aesthetic out of the industrial world and the industrial paradigm, it took more or less 120 years. The actual factors of the industrial world already beginning at the end of the 18th century. But before that thing was able to be incorporated in a new vision of the world, it took a long time. It took more or less 120 years, more than one generation of working. And basically the idea came up only for the convergence of many things, from philosophy, from science, and mainly from painting. That is always a very important key, a way to kind of relate many factors. So anyway. Finally, space. So you can read that. This is an anticipation of a paper that I will give shortly, but I think will be fine just to give you a few lines for those of you that wants to read things. So it's not the whole paper. Now, final chapter. Crisis, Modernity, and Information Technology. Now you see, we are dealing with all these issues, not because we like them, but because there is a necessity to do that. This word necessity for me is absolutely the key. And within the word necessity are embodies many things that of the story of our generation on a way, you know. We cannot disengage by problems. We cannot disengage by some kind of tension towards the things that needs to be done. And the whole issues of the tool is a crucial, really a crucial thing, because tools can be used in very different ways. Can be used as a way to dominate, as a way to destroy, as a way to create horrible things, we know. But at the same time, the tool can be a way of liberating and to enhancing. So these strange 70s ideas, I still use it, because I cannot do without. Okay? So there is a sense of necessity in doing these things. And what is the sense of necessity? That we must use all this thinking, we must use this technology, we must use these things in a direction that is the direction to address crisis. If we don't understand that this, all this effort, in some way is done towards the dealing with problems and with crises, we are kind of an intellectual game that is interesting, very rewarding in certain cases, but I think in the moment that we understand instead how these things, all these things that we are discussing, can be used in order to address problem and crisis, then we get an incredible strength and an incredible directions. So we are not making just because we like it. There is a necessity to do that. So these issues of crisis, modernity, and information technology, by the way, my definition of modernity is not chronological. Really, my definition of modernity is one that put it together, the idea of the crisis and the effort to answer to that crisis in a positive way. That is what modernity is for me. So it's a concept that goes throughout different times. There is a modern attitude and a kind of a conservative attitude. And exactly has to do with that specific point. But, of course, I will not discuss more about that, but it's written. Okay, here is not. Anyway, it is, I've done several things about that, among which is a session of a conference exactly related to this. When the link is active, you can see, by the way. Now, work, we finished, okay? So, the point that I wanted to make, I think it is pretty clear. I don't think that I need to recap. Space is information. But space is also information. And that is very interesting. So space is not only information because, as we have seen, it's a container and all these things that we can manipulate. But it's also, it has this inner dynamic aspect that is constantly in formation. So that dynamic paradigm that for us is, you know, is so much embedded in many things that we do, has to do with the notion of space, has to do the notion of space as information, and has to do with the notion of space as information. So that's the end. Now we are in our scratching, okay? We just relax. Just 5 minutes relaxation goes in showing some of the work that, not that I do, but we do. We do in different kind of aggregation. One aggregation is what is called nitro. Here we have friends visiting us, like UFO, previous Claudio Lucchesi, previous students of AA, and I think his partner probably is here. I don't know if he's here. Anyway, and he's in Messina. He's a previous AA student that is working with this organization called UFO, and then they are spread all over the world, and then they do fantastic things. But it's great that he is in Sicily. We have a studio in Sicily in which we offer all sorts of stuff, and but I don't want to advertise any in these circumstances. Anyway, and basically we work in different types of things, and this is a group, part of guests and part is all my friends of this group that is called NITRO, New Information Technology Research Office. And in NITRO we do several things. Okay, well, it's not there, but I could, in the meantime, do this, right? We do different things. Here, particularly, what I wanted to show is a series of competition that they've done in England, actually, and they got prizes on this. This was called Urban IRI. and again was tackled the problem, the crisis in some way of pollution and all things that are related in an urban environment like London or others. And in this particular case, there is a whole technique to deal with that issues, both in making in terms of technology and other things. So the competition was called Urban IRI. You can see it if you want. I think they got one of the prizes. I'm sure they got one of the prizes. This is another one, pretty interesting. Again, done in England by an organization that I think is called Burial Cemetery. That is pretty interesting. They do competition for new ideas of burying, of cemetery spaces. And so all this is an idea, of course, to create some kind of landscape, but all this is also very heavily related to certain ideas of information technology. I cannot go into any details of that, but in order to understand that we are really looking very often for I mean, they are looking. I don't design these things. I am kind of, I don't know how to say. But anyway, I don't sign this project, are their work, but are done together symbolically. I think that is a way to put it. Anyway, this is something that we've done in Sicily. It's a kind of an idea how you can do certain things in these beautiful places, but where there is no culture really in terms of either architectural or design or how to enhance certain things. I cannot go into detail again with that, but this is a way to implement different technologies all together. There are fiber optics, sensor, spray of water, and that is done with a kind of very traditional man-made structure of bamboos. And these are intended to be used in very different situations in the small town. These are some of the works of the course. I mean, I've done 6 or 7 courses and more than 500 students. Some of them are successful architects everywhere, and in London too. Lorenzo Grifantini, that I say hello, is one of my old students of '99, where the class was done only by 7 students, and then he ended up to being 130. Anyway, so this is another case. Again, how crisis, technology, and things can be combined together. And there is one part of Rome that is blocked, where basically where the Porta Portese market opens on the Sunday. Basically, people are kind of trapped within their apartments. It's almost impossible for them to get out because the market, folds everything. So the student envisioned this system that is really great, to have this system picking the person from their apartment and bringing down to the river. And all this is just telling very simply, but it's much more complex, with information technology, how you do it, what you do it in the same way, how do you aggregate it differently, these cells, etc. But I think it's a pretty nice idea, how to tackle an issue. All these are not 100% design in a traditional way. In some way are concept design, in some way, and the concept design is really important for us because it's a way to address crisis and technology at the same time, and then there is some design into them. This is another case. This is a pretty interesting one. They're dealing simultaneously with the issue of the person without the homeless, the issues of the tourism, the issues of gathering information, and the issues of recreating a kind of new sort of leisure landscape park. Everything, all of these ideas are combined together. What's going on is basically they are designed, this object here, that have 2 different conditions. You can rent these things, basically at a very little price, and going around the city and use it. But what this baby here does is collects all kind of information concerning pollution, light, traffic things, etc. So it's kind of a sensor that goes around. And it can also collect, of course, certain type of materials like homeless do. And then when they've done this, you can do it as a tourist, or you can do it as an homeless, or you can do it anyway. This is very important for us, you know, because it's a pretty democratic thing, you know. And because the homeless is not the homeless, it's a person that for sometimes want to be homeless, then later probably can be a tourist, right? And and this then, there is a pretty developed system in order how to reconfigure its space when they arrive and also. So this is only, in all these cases, please understand there is only one single board here. But if you go in the link, you will jump into the whole project, so you can see the whole project. Okay, okay, this one. Everything is on the web because that is a philosophy for us. Okay, now the show, whatever, and then it starts, everything is in here, all the details, okay? So that's why it's, I think we are trapped. All right. Okay. Now I'm basically almost ready to finish. Then it is important to understand that in our system, we still have alive a very important moment that is the final thesis. The final thesis is generally 9 months to 12 months of work. It's done by highly motivated students that followed my course with high success, that read everything possible, etc. And after all that cultural shock, they decided that they even want to do the thesis with me. So are kind of very motivated persons. And what is the crisis that we are addressing here is very interesting. For the 60s Olympics has been created a highway that cuts into in two sides a beautiful villa of Rome that's called Villa Doria Pamphili. So that is the crisis. What do we do there? There is that cut. How we address that is the problem. That is the crisis. How has been addressed? With a series of thinking, quite complex. One is that studying a lot all this has been founded some design of Borromini over there. And the design of Borromini, of course, you know, I was almost over with my Borromini syndrome, brought to us the idea that from a program point of view, we can create a mixite project, as we call it, but based on an idea of museum, if you want to call, of Borromini, in which there are some permanent work and some continuously changeable things. I call mixite projects because all our projects are mixed in function. So there is a driving force, but all the projects are simultaneously cultural, commercial, infrastructuring, green, and working projects. So all the functions always must be there, but they are characterized like a magnet by one issue. So in this case is that. And then at the same time, the Borromini idea brought a series of diagrams that you can see here in order to solve these issues of going from one side to the other. So that was a two-level input. And these actually are some of the Musumeci membrane structure, because we were working on that idea of the membrane structure, of course. And then what else? Okay, then we start to have an animal. What is this? Is a bridge, is a building, is a piece of nature. What it is something completely new that address that crisis with a completely new way. So is a piece of city of contemporary time that works 24 hours, that has driving force concerning that idea of Borromini, that has everything inside anyway. And is all these things together. And particularly, since this is a traffic, very heavy traffic system, this must be an ecological wise system, not in the way that is using, you know, in a wise way ecology, but in the way that it works as a filter, are something that really helps the environment, not only uses in a smart way, but helps in order to, dealing with pollution and everything. So there are all sorts of stuff into this, and the new technology can really do that, that allows the building to really improve the environment. Sorry about this. Okay, so it goes on. And to a certain extent, there are, to a lesser extent, important piece of work. This is another case. I think it is interesting because it shows similarities with some of your approach, but also dissimilarities. The dissimilarities is that basically here is one person alone with me, working with the tools that he has. There is not a real infrastructure. There is no lab. There is nothing like this, okay? It's one-to-one person relationship, basically. So everything is developed, is basically done in this one-to-one relationship without no many support on the outside. This is what we may call parametric design or parametric urbanism. That's why I put this at the end and we are over. And what is the crisis that the student was thinking, and that is a final thesis, now he's an architect, Sollazzo is his name. It is actually that this economic community doesn't really have any kind of presence in contemporary cities. You don't know what it is, where it is, how it is done. It's something that doesn't exist. So the idea was to create in major cities of Europe building related of the European community that will provide all sorts of services related to that, information service, but also cultural services and whatever. And within that was also important to playing very softly on a game that was a game between branding, the idea that these buildings in some way should look similar, or done also technologically similarly, but should be very, very different. So basically that's how the parametric design came about. He came with 4 bars, kind of a grid attitude, and those 4 bars are the different aspects of the program. Residence, representative, and then I don't remember what it is. And yeah, anyway, the different type of activities that are there, and one is, for us, also, always green is an important aspect for what I said before. Basically, these are how they work, and then they are put it in place, and then, of course, as you very well understand, and you've done it all the time, and that is a whole technique, but still effective, basically they are the contextual reactors. And the contextual reactors that you can see here, how they work and how you can manipulate it, and basically in order to change those 4 bars contextually, in order to make in each specific city a different building, but in some way following a similar approach, a similar techniques, etc. And then at the end, we have to do it in some way real building, because basically the faculty, it's rather traditional, I would say. So, in a kind way. And that's why at the end we have to actually prove that these are real buildings. So, thank you very much. I think this was too long, but sorry. Yes, if they want, I would love to.
Any questions? It's a long day for some.
Great.
Thank you very much for your lecture. It inspired me very much.
Thank you.